The Holy Gospel according to Luke. Jesus said, "But I say to you that listen, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who abuse you. If anyone strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And from anyone who takes away your coat, do not withhold even your shirt. Give to everyone who begs from you. And if anyone takes away your goods, do not ask for them again. Do to others as you would have them do to you. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. If you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. If you lend to those from whom you hope to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to receive as much again. But love your enemies. Do good and lend, expecting nothing in return. Your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, for he is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be put into your lap. For the measure you give will be the measure you get back. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Joseph had every reason not to forgive his brothers. They'd stripped him of his special coat, thrown him into a pit, and then sold him as a slave to Egypt. They covered their tracks by splattering blood on his coat, and then they went home and told their father that he must have died. Joseph had every reason not to forgive. But he did. He forgave them. And in forgiving, he even reframes the offense of his brothers. God sent me before you to preserve life. I hear Joseph not justifying his brothers' actions against him, but saying that God is always and everywhere in the business of taking the worst things that happen to us and going to work on them for the purposes of healing, restoring wholeness, and blessing. Because God is in this story, we can hope for the resurrection of all things. There's always another turn, another path, another grace. God brings healing, wholeness, and restoration through our forgiving, even when it's most difficult, especially when it's most difficult. Back in 1992, folks at Trinity Lutheran Church in Linwood, Washington, showed up for worship one Sunday morning to the smoking, charred hull of their church building, destroyed at the hands of serial arsonist Paul Keller, who was arrested the next year. Many people in the congregation were outraged when they learned that their pastor, Rick Rouse, had visited the arsonist in jail and offered him his personal forgiveness. Yet that simple and profound act began a process of healing and transformation that included the whole congregation, Paul Keller and his family. Trinity rebuilt with a spirit of inclusivity and welcoming of all. In the wake of embracing forgiveness for one who had been so destructive towards them, they reframed who they were as a people of faith, providing care and support to the most vulnerable in their community. They discovered what it means to really live out the cross and resurrection. I've heard it said that withholding forgiveness and holding on to our resentments is like pouring battery acid on one's own soul. Forgiving, even one's enemies, doesn't mean we let them off the hook for what they've done, but rather it allows us to let go of emotions that can destroy us from within and begin to walk a path towards healing. Love your enemies. Twice Jesus says that in today's passage from his Sermon on the Plain. And then for good measure, he adds, forgive as you have been forgiven. It's not easy, especially in today's fractured political climate. One of my pastor friends describes the current news cycle as a tsunami of absurdity. Executive orders fill immigrants and transgendered siblings with fears. The slashing of federal funding, imposing tariffs, and firing of federal workers with little forethought to consequences rocks both the stability and security of our nation and our world. Thousands are losing their jobs. Farmers can't sell their grain. There's lots of confusion, anger, worry, and grief swirling all around us. It's natural to want to lash out at those who have had a hand in all this disruption. But Jesus says that we're to forgive. How can we forgive those who only seem to care about themselves, their wealth, and their power? How can we forgive those who support them? It's not easy. And yet, I trust that it will be a necessary ingredient for us to do so as God calls us to work for a just, equitable, welcoming, and peace-filled world. Over 60 years ago, in the middle of the civil rights struggles, Dr. Martin Luther King said something that I think is important for us to hear today. Probably no admonition of Jesus has been more difficult to follow than the command to love your enemies. Some folks have sincerely felt that its actual practice is not possible. Others, like the philosopher Nietzsche, contends that Jesus' exhortation to love one's enemies is testimony to the fact that the Christian ethic is designed for the weak and the cowardly, and not for the strong and courageous. Jesus, they say, was an impractical idealist. But upheaval after upheaval has reminded us that modern humanity is traveling along a road called hate, in a journey that will bring us to destruction and damnation. King concludes by saying, far from being the pious injunction of a utopian dreamer, the command to love one's enemies is an absolute necessity for our survival. Our responsibility as Christians is to discover the meaning of this command and to seek passionately to live it out in our daily lives. I think that many people hear Jesus' admonition that follows his command to love our enemies, that admonition to turn the other cheek, as weakness and acceptance of the other's violence towards you. But the late biblical scholar Walter Wink teaches how Jesus really is offering a radical third way here. For in ancient times, an enslaved person could be rebuked by their master with a backhand slap, and it would be done with the right hand because the left hand was considered unclean. So when Jesus delivers that famous line, turn the other cheek, the slave would actually be offering the left cheek, which could only be slapped with the front of the hand, standing up as an equal to an oppressive slaveholder regime over him. So turning the other cheek was an act of courage, challenging the oppressor. And if someone takes your coat, Jesus says, be courageous and keep going. Get naked in front of them. In the honor and shame culture of that day, the beholder of another's nakedness is shamed. Giving them your shirt, which is probably the only other thing you're wearing, would reveal the injustice being done and in the process shame them. Loving our enemies may include our creatively revealing to the world the harms that they have done, perhaps bringing them some shame. Loving our enemies embraces restorative ways of justice. It breaks the cycle of retribution and violence. I sense that the courage required is drawn from being fully centered in God's love. God doesn't take sides. Even our enemies are God's beloved children. To borrow a line from the Sikh tradition, they are a part of us that we don't yet know. We're all connected. Forgiving our enemies doesn't let them off the hook, but rather keeps our anger-fueled desires for revenge from consuming God's light and love that resides within. I think we can take a cue from Joseph today to reframe how God might use the current tsunami of absurdity to bring about a more just, peaceful, and secure world. I'm reminded that the Chinese symbol for conflict or crisis is made up of two characters, one for danger and one for opportunity. And I trust that our God always leans towards the opportunity. We chanted in today's psalm these words, "Be still before the Lord and wait patiently. Do not be provoked by the one who prospers, the one who succeeds in evil schemes. Refrain from anger. Leave rage alone. Do not be provoked. It leads only to evil." Forgiving our enemies may require that we turn the other cheek as a challenge and visual protest to the oppressor. Pastor Steve Garnas Holmes ended a poetic reflection on this week's gospel by saying that the cross is God's other cheek. In Luke, Jesus hanging on the cross says, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Forgiving enemies, turning our other cheek, frees and transforms us so that from an inner stillness we might live out God's ways of love. So let's not get washed away by that tsunami of absurdity at loose in our world. Let's instead turn to one another with encouragement and support, seeking together for God to give us hearts ready to forgive and show mercy, just as God shows us mercy. Practice curiosity and wonder. Seek beauty in the world that will keep your heart from hardening. Trust that God can even use a tsunami of absurdity to transform the landscape of our world and bring into being the beloved community that Dr. King dreamed of. And today, Jesus reminds us that we can play a part by forgiving as we have been forgiven. And yes, that even includes forgiving our enemies. Yet also keep in mind that Jesus instructed and taught how to shame them appropriately. Amen.